Vammika Sutta, Bhikkhu Sujato. The Termite Mound. So I have heard. At one time the Buddha was staying near Svarth in Jeta's Grove, Anthapiyakares Monastery. Now at that time Venerable Kassapa the Prince was staying in the dark forest. Kassapa the Prince, Kumra Kassapa, was ordained at 20 KD 1:75.1.1. His verses are collected in the Therath, Thag 2.41. His love of elaborate similes and playful similes is shown in the Vammika Sutta, DN 23, and echoed here in the teachings to him. He was declared the foremost of those with brilliant speech, AN 1.217. The dark forest, and Havana, was a thick grove south of Svarth often visited by monks and nuns for meditation. However, this is the only discourse where someone is said to be staying there. Then, late at night, a glorious deity, lighting up the entire dark forest, went up to Kassapa the Prince, stood to one side, and said, "The deity offers a series of obscure riddles full of secret meaning, almost like a dream sequence." The deliberate use of obscurity is a hallmark of Brahmanical literature, for the gods love hidden things. Parakakmhi Dev, Satapatha Brahma 10.6.2.2 and throughout. The sequence is set out as a quest for buried treasure. This mytheme is implicit in the Vedic myth of Indra freeing the cattle and the sun from the Vala cave, an act that liberates the truth. Sometimes it is made explicit, as when Indra is said to bring up the treasures buried deep, Rigveda 8.66.4. The Asvins are also associated with unearthing buried gems, Rigveda 1.117.5, or gold, Rigveda 1.117.12, imagery ultimately based in mining for the wealth of minerals underground. Monk. This termite mound fumes by night and flames by day. Worship of termite mounds and the deadly snakes they harbor is still common in India today and is probably pre-Vedic. The Satapatha Brahma acknowledges a ritual significance to the anthill as a creative manifestation of the earth upon which offerings may be laid and whose ants were divine. 2.6.2.17, 6.3.3.5, 14.1.2.10. In Bhadrayaka Upaniyad 4.7, Ijnavalkya compares a dead body bereft of soul to the lifeless slough of a snake on an ant hill. While ant hills don't fume and flame, large termite mounds leverage the temperature differential of day and night to create convection flows that regulate temperature and flush carbon dioxide. The Brahmin said, "Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword." The sword is taken up, a symbol whose roots lie in the discovery of metal smelting and the power this grants to the one who wields the sword. But the phrase has a double meaning, for Sata means both sword and sacred treatise, while Abhikha means both dig, ubi plus square root kar, and si, ubi plus square root ik, this sense not in Pali, but compare to Vedic abhiki. Thus, having entered the dark wood, the clever one, Sumetha, is urged to use the wisdom of scripture in order to see. This sense is reinforced by the fact that is the Brahmin who says this. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a sticking point. Lagi occurs only here, and is glossed by the commentary with palaya, obstacle. Such an obscure term must have been selected for a play on words. Sanskrit lagna has the primary sense to stick, adhere, while also having a sense of the beginning or coming into contact with something. In modern languages such as Hindi, Marathi, or Kannada it has taken on the sense of marriage, and perhaps here we see an anticipation of this. If we are on the right track, the lagi would be the initial challenge for a mendicant seeker, namely their attachment to family. This would explain why it is the first obstacle's a sticking point, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the sticking point." Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a bullfrog. The male Indian bullfrog possesses a pair of prominent dark blue vocal sacs that puff up and down as it croaks, hence the Pali name Udumiika, puffer. Rigveda 7.10 is addressed to frogs, who lie fallow in the dry but spring to life in the rains, filling the countryside with their amorous croaks, like the Brahmin priests reciting their verses and passing them down to students. A bullfrog, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the bullfrog." Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a forked path. Rigveda 10.88.15 speaks of the two paths of gods and mortals, Devanem Uttamartim, later formalized as the path of the forefathers, Pitana, leading to rebirth, and that of the gods, Devana, leading to liberation. This corresponds to the twofold choice of the young Siddhartha, to stay at home or to go forth, a forked path, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the forked path." Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a filter of ash. Kagavra is a filter through which, according to JA 525:29.2, water drips away like the brief days of our lives. The commentaries say that such alkaline, filters were used by laundrymen. This refers to the traditional method of creating lye, a soap precursor, for washing, where a barrel is filled with wood ash through which water is passed. No matter how many pots of water are poured in, the commentary adds, it keeps dripping a filter of ash, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the filter of ash." Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a tortoise, as described in Satapatha Brahma 7.5.1. A tortoise was placed on the altar to represent the primordial powers of creation, the sap of life, the sun, the breath, and the act of creation itself. Its lower and upper shells and its body in between correspond to the three worlds, the earth, the heavens, and the mid-space. It therefore connotes the ancient, endless movement of life. A tortoise, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the tortoise." Dig, clever one, having taken up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a butcher's knife and chopping board. In this brutal simile, ACI is a knife and SNA is a place where animals are slaughtered, either a slaughterhouse or, as here, an implement for the slaughter. MND 1 minute and 23.18 seconds says this phrase has the meaning of chopping, adhikuanahina. Compare with ACSNA with Macron in the violent, sexually graphic hymn at Rigveda 10.86.18c. Vedic SNA was a sewn basket for carrying the flesh of a slaughtered beast. See also Rigveda 1.16.1.10, a sense that developed to chopping block and to slaughterhouse. Jameson and Brereton read the Vedic passage as an analogy for the horse sacrifice, at the climax of which the queen has vulgar and very public sex with the dead horse. This cements in the most explicit way possible the oneness of sexual potency with the cycle of life and death. A butcher's knife and chopping board, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the butcher's knife and chopping board." Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a scrap of meat. Another simile shared with MN 22 minutes and 3.10 seconds. A massapiece is small enough to be grabbed by a crow, MN 54 minutes and 16.1 second, or to quickly disintegrate on a stove, TN 7.74:7.1, thus is a scrap of meat rather than a substantial piece. It emphasizes the meanness and poverty of mortal life, our desires and attachments bound up with this transient scrap of meat. We call a body a scrap of meat, sir. The Brahmin said, "Throw out the scrap of meat." Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Picking up the sword and digging, the clever one saw a mighty serpent. Nga here means both a cobra, the literal snake that lives underneath an anthill, and the serpent of mysterious power that is analogous to an arahant, that spiritual giant. A mighty serpent, sir. The Brahmin said, "Leave the mighty serpent. Do not disturb the mighty serpent. Worship the mighty serpent." Mendicant, go to the Buddha and ask him about this riddle. You should remember it in line with his answer. I don't see anyone in this world, with its gods, mras, and divinities, this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its gods and humans, who could provide a satisfying answer to this riddle except for the realized one or his disciple or someone who has heard it from them. This is, of course, a direct slight on the Brahmins who prided themselves on finding explanations for the most obscure and puzzling passages. That is what that deity said before vanishing right there. Then, when the night had passed, Kassapa the prince went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what had happened. Then he asked, "Sir, what is the Termite Mound? What is the fuming by night and flaming by day? Who is the Brahmin, and who the clever one? What are the sword, the digging, the sticking point, the bullfrog, the forked path, the filter of ash, the tortoise, the butcher's knife and chopping board, and the scrap of meat? And what is the mighty serpent?" Mendicant, Termite Mound, is a term for this body made up of the four principal states, produced by mother and father, built up from rice and porridge, liable to impermanence, to wearing away and erosion, to breaking up and destruction. Just as a termite mound is created by activity driven by eating and excreting, so this body is created from within by food. Also, the body, like a termite mound, is home to countless small creatures. Thinking and considering all night about what you did during the day, apparently stressing oneself at night over work is not a modern phenomenon. This is the fuming at night. The work you apply yourself to during the day by body, speech, and mind after thinking about it all night, this is the flaming by day. Brahmin is a term for the realized one, the perfected one, the fully awakened Buddha. Clever one is a term for the trainee mendicant. Sword is a term for noble wisdom. Digging is a term for rousing energy. Sticking point is a term for ignorance. Throw out the sticking points means give up ignorance. Dig, clever one, having picked up the sword. Bullfrog is a term for anger and distress. The bullfrog, Udumiika, evokes those renunciates who become puffed up, udatta, and argumentative over doctrines, e.g. Thag 17.1:11.1. Throw out the bullfrog means give up anger and distress. A forked path is a term for doubt. Throw out the forked paths means give up doubt. A filter of ash is a term for the 5 hindrances, that is, the commentary says that, just as water continually drips through such a filter, the mind of someone beset by the 5 hindrances cannot stay fixed internally on what is wholesome. This contrasts with the mind in absorption, which is illustrated with similes of water that emphasize stillness and containment, DN 2:76.1, etc. The hindrances of sensual desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. Throw out the filter of asha means give up the 5 hindrances. Tortoise is a term for the 5 grasping aggregates, that is, the 5 aggregates are the tortoise's 5 limbs, with consciousness as the head. The aggregates represent the changing world of conditions driven by karma, just as the tortoise is the creative force and life of the 3 worlds. In Samdhi, the senses are withdrawn like a tortoise's limbs, SN 35.241.4. Form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness. Throw out the tortoise means give up the 5 grasping aggregates. Butcher's knife and chopping board is a term for the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. The senses work because the sense stimulus smashes into the sense organ, like a knife on a chopping block. We seek pleasurable sensations to mask the inherently turbulent nature of sense experience, sights known by the eye, which are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds known by the ear. Smells known by the nose. Tastes known by the tongue. Touches known by the body, which are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Throw out the butcher's knife and chopping board means give up the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. Scrap of meat is a term for greed and relishing. Throw out the scrap of meat means to give up greed and relishing. Mighty serpent is a term for a mendicant who has ended the defilements. This is the meaning of, leave the mighty serpent. Do not disturb the mighty serpent. Worship the mighty serpent. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Kassapa the prince approved what the Buddha said.